Imagine that there are two children in your home and one slice of cake is left on the table. You need a rule for dividing it. The rule must do more than produce two pieces. Both children should believe the result is fair, even though each of them would prefer the larger share. Human beings discovered an elegant solution to this problem a long time ago. One child cuts, the other chooses. The child holding the knife is free to divide the cake however they like, but they know the other child gets first choice. If the pieces are unequal, the cutter will probably be left with the smaller one. So the cutter has a rational incentive to make the two pieces as equal as possible. The mechanism does not require generosity. It does not assume that either child is morally exceptional. It uses self-interest to produce a fair result. It is a beautiful little rule, but it works because the situation is extraordinarily simple. There are only two people. There is only one cake. Everyone can see what is being divided, and everyone agrees that the two pieces should be roughly equal. Now scale the problem up. Suppose there are not two children, but millions of strangers. The thing being divided is no longer a cake. The object of distribution is now the benefits and burdens of an entire society. Who receives a good education? Who has access to political power? The questions multiply. When the economy collapses, who is protected? The most dangerous work, who performs it? Property, connections, confidence, opportunity, who inherits them, and who can afford to make a mistake, while one mistake destroys another life? These questions are not decided by one visible act of distribution. They are shaped by what the American philosopher John Rawls called the basic structure of society, the major institutions that organize rights, opportunities, wealth, political influence, and social cooperation. Once the problem reaches this scale, I cut, you choose no longer works. There is no single cake. No one holds the knife as a neutral party, and there is no moment when society gathers around a table and divides everything from the beginning. We inherit institutions that were built before we arrived. We enter the world in different families, different bodies, and different social positions. By the time we are old enough to argue about fairness, the game has already been running for generations. So what kind of rule could possibly make that game fair? That was the problem John Rawls tried to answer in A Theory of Justice, published in 1971. Hi, I'm Fish. The question at the centre of this book is as simple as it is unsettling. If no one chooses the hand they are dealt at birth, what could make the inequalities that follow morally legitimate? To understand why Rawls's book mattered, we need to understand the world into which it appeared. The United States of the late 1960s and early 1970s was not a society calmly discussing abstract principles. The Vietnam War had placed enormous pressure on the country's political legitimacy. A military draft could determine who was sent into combat, while deferments and social privilege made the burden of war profoundly unequal. The draft lottery, introduced in 1969, used birth dates to establish the order in which men were called up. A fact no one had chosen could suddenly become politically decisive. At home, the civil rights movement had already transformed American law, but the legacy of segregation remained embedded in schools, neighborhoods, policing, wealth, and political power. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated in 1968. Cities had experienced riots and violent unrest. Trust in institutions was collapsing. Questions that had once been treated as technical or administrative were becoming impossible to avoid. Why should some people carry the heaviest burdens of social cooperation? Why should the family, race, or class into which a person is born shape the possibilities of an entire life? And when citizens disagree profoundly about religion, morality, success, and the meaning of a good life, what principles can they still share? Rawls was not a revolutionary speaker standing before a crowd. He was a quiet and methodical academic. His book offered no slogans and very little drama. It was long, abstract, and famously difficult to read. Yet it changed political philosophy. Rawls did not begin by announcing which political party was right or which policy should be adopted. He went beneath those disputes and asked what any just social order would have to explain. His most important opponent was utilitarianism. Utilitarianism had dominated much of modern moral and political thought in the English-speaking world. Thinkers such as Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill had attempted to replace inherited authority and moral dogma with a rational standard. Instead of asking whether a rule was commanded by tradition, religion, or social rank, it asked about consequences. How much happiness does this policy produce? How much suffering does it prevent? Does it increase the total welfare of society? This was an enormous intellectual achievement. A nobleman's pleasure was no longer automatically worth more than a labourer's. A policy could not be justified merely because it protected an ancient privilege. Its consequences had to be examined. In principle, moral judgment became more public, more rational, and more impartial. But Rawls saw a danger hidden inside this moral calculation. When we add everyone's welfare together into a single social total, the boundaries between persons begin to disappear. A large benefit, enjoyed by many people, can appear to compensate for an extreme burden imposed on a few. The calculation may tell us that society as a whole is better off, even while particular individuals are being treated in ways no one would voluntarily accept. 2 years after A Theory of Justice appeared, Ursula K. Le Guin gave this problem one of its most memorable literary forms in The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. Omelas is a prosperous and joyful city. Its people are intelligent. Its festivals are beautiful. Its children are healthy. There is peace, art, and abundance. But the happiness of the entire city depends upon one condition. A child is locked in a filthy room. The child is neglected, frightened, and kept in misery. Everyone eventually learns that the prosperity of Omelas somehow depends upon this suffering. If the child is released, the happiness of the city will disappear. From the standpoint of aggregate welfare, the arrangement is easy to defend. Thousands experience flourishing and joy. One person experiences terrible suffering. The overall calculation appears positive, but for the child, there is no balance. The happiness of the city does not enter the child's life as compensation. The child does not possess a share in the total happiness that can offset the pain. Other people enjoy the benefits. The child bears the cost. This is the point Rawls captures when he argues that utilitarianism does not take seriously enough the distinction between persons. Within one person's life, sacrifice can make sense. I may endure the pain of surgery to preserve my health. I may give up leisure today in order to finish work that matters to me tomorrow. Earlier suffering and later benefit belong to the same life. The person who bears the cost is also the person who receives the gain. A society is different. Society is not one enormous individual with a single system of pleasure and pain. It is composed of separate people, each with a life of their own. We cannot automatically justify one person's suffering by pointing to benefits received by somebody else. Nor can we tell the child hidden beneath the city that the arrangement is fair simply because Omelas is beautiful. For Rawls, each person possesses a moral status that cannot simply be absorbed into the welfare of society as a whole. Basic liberties and fundamental interests must be protected against calculations that treat individuals as interchangeable containers of utility. This is why Rawls opens A Theory of Justice with one of the most famous claims in modern political philosophy. Justice is the first virtue of social institutions, as truth is of systems of thought. A false theory should not be accepted merely because it is convenient. In the same way, Rawls argues, an unjust institution should not be accepted merely because it is efficient or productive. But rejecting the sacrifice of the few does not yet give us a complete theory of justice. It may protect us against Omelas. It does not tell us how income, opportunity, and social position should be organized in an ordinary society. And here, Rawls confronts another powerful defense of inequality. That defense does not say that some people must be sacrificed for the happiness of the majority. It says that people deserve what they have earned. Consider the successful executive. He deserves a high salary because he made good decisions. The surgeon spent years studying and developing rare abilities, so she earns more than others. The student who enters an elite university worked harder, and that effort explains the opportunity. And the poor person, according to the harshest version of this view, is poor because he failed to work, plan, or compete effectively. This is the moral language of merit. It is more than an economic argument. It tells us that the winners deserve admiration and the losers are responsible for their position. Rawls does not deny that effort matters or that individuals bear responsibility for their choices. His claim is narrower. Natural talent, family background, and social opportunity are morally arbitrary. Because we did not choose them, they cannot by themselves establish how much of society's wealth, power, and opportunity we morally deserve. Begin with the most obvious case, inherited social rank. In a feudal society, a person's prospects may be fixed at birth. The child of a noble inherits land, authority, and education. The child of a peasant inherits dependence. Modern societies reject this arrangement because birth is not an achievement. No one earns a noble parent. The usual alternative is formal equality of opportunity. Careers are legally open to everyone. The university no longer states that only aristocrats may apply. The company does not formally reserve senior positions for one family. This is progress. But Rawls asks whether it is enough. Suppose two children are legally permitted to compete for the same university place. One grows up in a stable home with books, private tutoring, nutritious food, and parents who understand the education system. The other grows up in an unsafe environment, attends an underfunded school, and spends part of each day caring for younger siblings. Both are allowed to take the same examination. The rule is formally equal. The preparation for the competition is not. This is why Rawls distinguishes formal equality of opportunity from fair equality of opportunity. Formal equality says positions are legally open. Fair equality of opportunity asks whether people with similar ability have genuinely comparable prospects, regardless of the class into which they were born. That requires more than removing legal barriers. It may require strong public education, healthcare, nutrition, protection from poverty, and institutions that prevent advantage from reproducing itself without limit. Now imagine that society somehow succeeds. Family wealth no longer determines the quality of education. Social class no longer controls access to opportunity. The starting positions have become much more equal. The competition begins. Some people still perform better than others. Some people learn mathematics quickly. Others possess extraordinary physical coordination. The variation is wide unusual memory, confidence or imagination on one side, chronic illness or disability on the other. Can we now say that the winners fully deserve their greater rewards? Rawls asks us to notice that natural talent is also a matter of luck. No one chooses the brain, body, or temperament with which they enter the world. A person may develop a talent through discipline, but the initial capacity to develop it is not something the person created from nothing. Even the market value of a talent depends upon social circumstances. The ability to throw a ball with unusual speed may be extremely valuable in one society and almost useless in another. A gifted programmer may become wealthy in the 21st century, while the same cognitive abilities might have produced no comparable income in a medieval village. Market rewards reflect demand, technology, institutions, and historical circumstances. They are not a direct measurement of moral worth. At this point, the defender of merit may retreat to one final position. Perhaps intelligence and family background are matters of luck, but effort is different. The successful person worked hard, delayed pleasure, remained disciplined, and used their abilities well. Surely that effort is morally theirs. Rawls's answer is careful. He does not say effort is meaningless. He asks why some people find sustained effort easier than others. The willingness to work is shaped partly by family expectations, childhood stability, education, social recognition, and the realistic possibility of success. It may also be influenced by temperament and health. A child who repeatedly sees effort rewarded learns a different relationship to the future from a child whose environment makes planning seem pointless. The ability to concentrate, regulate emotion, and delay gratification is real. But it does not emerge outside biology and society, so Rawls does not conclude that nobody is responsible for anything. He concludes that effort alone cannot serve as an unquestionable foundation for the distribution of social rewards. Your talents and your willingness to use them may justify certain expectations within a fair system. They do not prove that the system itself is fair. This distinction is essential. Rawls does not say that a surgeon and a student must receive the same income or that people should never benefit from their choices. He distinguishes moral desert from legitimate expectations. If a just institution publicly establishes a salary for a particular job and a person completes that work, the person has a legitimate claim to the agreed payment. But that does not mean the salary structure was written into the moral universe. The institution still needs justification. Why does one kind of work command enormous rewards, while another socially necessary contribution remains poorly paid? The answer cannot simply be that the market produced that result. Markets operate inside legal and political institutions. Property rights, contracts, education, inheritance, taxation, and corporate power are all structured by rules. The market does not stand outside society and reveal what everyone morally deserves. It is one of the institutions whose rules must be judged. Rawls has now removed two common foundations for inequality. We cannot justify institutions merely because they maximize total welfare, nor can we assume that whatever people receive through talent and competition is morally deserved. But destruction is easier than construction. If birth is arbitrary, talent is arbitrary, and effort is partly shaped by conditions we did not choose, how should society organize inequality? Should all income be equal? Rawls does not think so, nor does he want to suppress talent or eliminate the rewards of effort. He wants to identify the conditions under which inequalities can be justified to everyone affected by them. To do that, he designs the most famous thought experiment in modern political philosophy, the original position behind the veil of ignorance. The original position is not an event that took place in history. Rawls is not claiming that human beings once gathered and signed an actual contract. It is a device for thinking. Imagine that you must choose the principles that will govern a society, but you do not know which position you will occupy inside it. Your class is unknown. Whether your family will be wealthy or poor, unknown. Ethnicity, sex, religion, social status, all hidden. So is physical health, and whether you will live with serious limitations. The talent society values may or may not be yours. You do not even know your own conception of a good life, whether you will be religious, ambitious, artistic, private, traditional, or unconventional. The veil removes the information that would allow you to design rules around your own advantage. Knowing you would be rich might lead you to design weak protections for the poor. The same logic applies to majority religion. You might restrict minority beliefs, and exceptional talent would tempt you to build a society that gives winners nearly everything. Behind the veil, those strategies are no longer available. You may occupy any position. But the parties behind the veil are not ignorant of everything. They understand general facts about economics, psychology, and social life. They know resources are limited. People hold different values. Institutions influence motivation and productivity. And cooperation can produce benefits that individuals could not create alone. Rawls assumes what he calls the circumstances of justice. Society is neither a paradise of unlimited abundance nor a catastrophe in which cooperation is impossible. Resources are moderately scarce. People have partly conflicting interests, but they can benefit from living under shared institutions. The task is to choose principles for that continuing system of cooperation. The veil is designed to create impartiality. It asks you to judge social rules without knowing whether those rules will place you among the winners or the losers. This may sound like a strange act of imagination, but we already use similar reasoning. When designing the rules of a game, we often regard a rule as suspicious if it was written after one player learned which side they would occupy. Evaluating a court procedure, we ask whether we would accept it if we were the accused rather than the prosecutor. And when judging censorship, we should ask whether we would support the same power if it were controlled by people who hated our own beliefs. The veil generalizes that intuition. A fair principle should not depend on knowing that you will personally benefit from it. What would people choose under these conditions? Rawls argues that they would reject classical utilitarianism. The reason is not simply that they are terrified of risk. The parties are choosing principles that will organize their entire lives. Basic liberties, self-respect, and the possibility of pursuing a meaningful life are at stake. A utilitarian society could, in principle, reduce the rights or opportunities of some people if doing so produced a sufficiently large gain in aggregate welfare. Behind the veil, you do not know whether you will belong to the group whose sacrifice makes the calculation work. Rawls, therefore, argues that people would protect certain fundamental interests rather than place them inside an unrestricted social calculation. He also argues that the parties would use a form of maximin reasoning in choosing distributive principles. Maximin means comparing the worst position produced by each available system and choosing the system whose worst position is best. Suppose one society offers spectacular wealth at the top, but leaves the least advantaged in severe insecurity. Another society has a lower ceiling, but guarantees stronger liberties. Education, healthcare, political standing, and material security for those at the bottom. Behind the veil, Rawls argues, people would care intensely about the floor. This does not mean every rational person in every uncertain situation should use maximin. If you are choosing between ordinary financial investments where reliable probabilities are available, the stakes are profound. The probabilities of occupying particular social positions are unavailable. And some losses, especially the loss of basic liberty and self-respect, are too serious to gamble away for the possibility of greater aggregate wealth. This remains one of the most disputed parts of Rawls's theory. Critics have argued that people behind the veil might maximize expected welfare rather than protect the minimum position so strongly. Rawls does not possess a machine that mathematically forces every rational chooser to accept his answer. The original position is a model of fairness. Its conclusions depend upon deeper judgments about citizens as free and equal persons. Still, Rawls believes that the parties would select two principles of justice. The first principle protects equal basic liberties. Each person should have an equal claim to a fully adequate system of basic liberties, compatible with the same system for everyone else. These liberties include freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, political participation, freedom of association, personal liberty, and protection under the rule of law. Why must these liberties come first? Because behind the veil, you do not know what you will believe. You may become a member of the majority religion. Perhaps you belong to a small and unpopular faith. You could reject religion entirely, or you might hold political views that most citizens dislike. A society that allows majorities to remove basic liberties in exchange for greater prosperity or social satisfaction creates a risk no one can safely ignore. Rawls, therefore, gives basic liberties priority over ordinary economic advantages. A government cannot simply say, "Surrender freedom of conscience, and we will increase national income." It cannot justify permanent political exclusion by pointing to economic growth. This does not mean every liberty is unlimited or that no legal restrictions are ever justified. Liberties must be organized into a coherent and equal system. One person's freedom must be compatible with the equal freedom of others. But the general principle is clear. Basic citizenship cannot be treated as a commodity to be exchanged for efficiency. The second principle governs social and economic inequalities. Rawls does not demand that every income and position be identical. He accepts that differences in responsibility, authority, and reward may be useful. Some occupations require years of training. Some roles carry unusual burdens. Certain incentives may increase production or encourage socially valuable work, but inequality is justified only under two conditions. The first is fair equality of opportunity. Social positions must be open to all, and people with comparable ability and motivation should have genuinely comparable prospects, regardless of the class into which they were born. This principle has priority over the second part of the second principle. A society cannot defend a hereditary elite by saying that the elite produces economic growth that eventually helps the poor. The offices themselves must be fairly accessible. The second condition is the difference principle. Social and economic inequalities must be arranged so that they are to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society. This is the most famous and most misunderstood part of Rawls's theory. The difference principle does not ask whether inequality exists. It asks which institutional arrangement gives the least advantaged the best long-term position. Imagine three possible systems. The first system gives everyone 10 units of social advantage. The second gives the least advantaged 20, while those at the top receive 50. In the third, the top receive 100, but the least advantaged receive only 15. Strict equality would select the first system. A principle that simply maximizes total output might select the third. The difference principle selects the second because the minimum position is highest there. The unequal distribution is permitted, but only because the inequality improves the position of those who receive the least. Consider the salaries of highly trained surgeons. A society may pay surgeons more than many other workers. The additional reward might encourage people to complete difficult training, work long hours, and develop rare skills. If that system produces better medical care for everyone, including people with the fewest resources, some income inequality may be justified. But the justification is not that the surgeon is a morally superior human being. It is not that society owes unlimited wealth to anyone who possesses a rare talent. The justification is institutional. Does this compensation structure form part of a system that makes the least advantaged better off than they would be under other feasible arrangements? Could similar medical benefits be achieved with a smaller income gap? Does the system give children from poor families a genuine chance to become surgeons? Are essential workers denied healthcare while medical professionals accumulate extraordinary wealth? Does economic inequality translate into unequal political power? The difference principle requires comparison among entire institutional systems. It does not look at one wealthy individual, notice that the economy grew, and declare the outcome just. This point matters because Rawls is sometimes interpreted as defending a sophisticated version of trickle-down economics. Allow the rich to become as wealthy as possible, provided a small portion eventually reaches the poor. That is not his position. Rawls judges the basic structure as a whole: education, inheritance, ownership, taxation, labour markets, political influence, and access to productive assets all matter. He was deeply concerned that concentrated wealth could undermine the fair value of political liberty. A society may formally give everyone one vote, but if a small class controls media, campaign finance, and economic opportunity, political freedom is no longer equal in any meaningful sense. This is why Rawls did not regard ordinary welfare state capitalism as the final realization of justice. A welfare state may permit ownership and political influence to become highly concentrated, then redistribute some income after the fact. Rawls was more sympathetic to systems that disperse productive assets and human capital in advance, such as what he called property-owning democracy, as well as certain forms of liberal socialism. The goal is not merely to rescue people after inequality has placed them in a subordinate position. It is to prevent a small group from controlling the terms of social cooperation. Rawls also does not claim that society owns your mind or body. When he describes natural talents as a common asset, he is making a statement about institutions, not personal ownership. Your intelligence, strength, or imagination remain yours to exercise. No one may treat your body as collective property, but the social distribution of talent should not be organized as if natural advantage creates an unlimited, private, moral entitlement. Those who benefit from fortunate talents may improve their own lives. The system should also arrange those advantages so that people who received less valuable combinations of talent are not abandoned. The faster runner may run ahead. But the rules of the race cannot be written as though speed alone determines who counts as a full citizen. This is the balance Rawls is trying to construct. He rejects three positions: the utilitarian willingness to sacrifice some for total welfare, the meritocratic claim that winners simply deserve whatever they can obtain, and absolute equality if it leaves everyone, including the least advantaged, worse off. His alternative is a society of free and equal citizens whose inequalities must be justified through fair cooperation. At this point, Rawls's theoretical structure is complete. The original position gives us a fair standpoint. The veil of ignorance removes the ability to design rules around personal advantage. From these, two principles emerge. The first protects equal basic liberties. Fair equality of opportunity limits the reproduction of social class. And the difference principle asks whether economic inequalities improve the prospects of the least advantaged. It is an extraordinarily powerful structure, but no theory this ambitious escapes criticism. After A Theory of Justice was published, much of political philosophy organized itself around Rawls. Some thinkers developed his ideas. Others attacked them from the right, the left, and the communitarian tradition. One of the most influential challenges came from Rawls's Harvard colleague, Robert Nozick. In 1974, Nozick published Anarchy, State, and Utopia, a foundational text of modern libertarian philosophy. Nozick believed Rawls focused too heavily on the pattern of distribution. Rawls asks whether institutions produce a distribution that protects fair opportunity and benefits the least advantaged. Nozick asks a different question. How did each person acquire what they possess? For Nozick, justice is historical. If property was acquired justly and transferred voluntarily, the resulting distribution may be just, even if it is extremely unequal. To make the argument vivid, Nozick introduced the example of Wilt Chamberlain, one of the most famous basketball players of his era. Imagine that society begins with a distribution everyone accepts as just. It could be equal, Rawlsian, or based on some other preferred pattern. Chamberlain signs a contract. Every spectator who wants to watch him play agrees to place an additional 25 cents into a special box. The transactions are voluntary. No one is forced to attend the game. No one is deceived. Each spectator prefers seeing Chamberlain play to keeping the extra 25 cents. After 1 million spectators have paid, Chamberlain is far wealthier than everyone else. The original distribution has been disrupted. Nozick asks, how did justice become injustice? The starting distribution was just. Every transaction was voluntary. Why should the unequal result be condemned? His conclusion is that liberty disrupts patterns. Any attempt to preserve a particular distribution over time will require continuous interference. People will give money, exchange goods, form businesses, make gifts, and reward talents. These free actions will repeatedly produce new inequalities. To restore the preferred pattern, the state must tax, regulate, or reverse some of those transactions. Nozick sees this as an infringement of self-ownership. Individuals own their bodies, labour, and legitimately acquired property. He famously argued that taxation of earnings from labour is, in an important respect, comparable to forced labour. If the state takes a portion of what you earned, it has effectively claimed a portion of the time you spent working. This is a serious challenge to Rawls. Can a society protect individual liberty while continually adjusting the distribution of wealth? Does the difference principle give institutions too much authority over the results of voluntary exchange? Rawls has resources with which to respond. He can argue that voluntary transactions do not take place in an institutional vacuum. The legal definition of property, the enforcement of contracts, access to education, the structure of corporations, and the distribution of bargaining power already shape which exchanges are possible. If the initial conditions are profoundly unequal, calling every later transaction voluntary may conceal domination. A worker who accepts dangerous employment because every alternative is worse has formally consented. Whether the background structure is fair remains an open question. Rawls can also argue that property rights are important, but not absolute. They belong within a system of equal liberty and fair cooperation. An institution that allows accumulated wealth to control political power may undermine the equal citizenship that made property rights legitimate in the first place. Still, Nozick identifies a tension Rawls cannot simply dismiss. Liberty creates movement. People form attachments, make choices, and produce unequal outcomes. A patterned conception of distributive justice must explain how much institutional correction is compatible with personal independence. The second major criticism comes from communitarian thinkers, especially Michael Sandel. In Liberalism and the Limits of Justice, published in 1982, Sandel challenges the conception of the person that seems to stand behind Rawls's original position. The person behind the veil has been separated from social class, religion, family, history, and community. Sandel asks what remains. Rawls seems to imagine what Sandel calls an unencumbered self capable of stepping back from every attachment and choosing principles from a neutral distance. But real people are never entirely unencumbered. We do not first exist as abstract individuals and later select every identity we possess. We are born into languages, histories, families, and communities. Some commitments are not accessories we can remove without changing who we are. They help constitute our identity. A person may understand herself as a daughter, a citizen, a member of a religious community, or the inheritor of a historical responsibility. These relationships are not always freely chosen preferences. They may be part of the self that is doing the choosing. Sandel therefore worries that Rawls's theory gains neutrality by emptying the person of too much moral substance. If justice must remain neutral among competing ideas of the good life, can it recognize obligations that arise from shared history and communal membership? Can a society survive on fair procedures alone, without a thicker account of civic virtue and common purpose? This criticism reaches deeper than Nozick's. Nozick and Rawls both begin with the individual. Sandel questions whether individual identity can be understood apart from community in the first place. Yet, Rawls can respond here as well. The original position does not have to be interpreted as a literal portrait of the human self. Rawls does not need to claim that actual people possess no identities or attachments. The veil can be understood as a device of representation. It models the reasons we should use when deciding the basic rights of citizens. Your religion or family history may be central to who you are, but it does not follow that your group should receive more political freedom than everyone else, or determine how many rights strangers possess. The purpose of the veil is not to erase identity from life, but to prevent it from becoming an unquestionable title to political domination. Rawls later clarified this position in Political Liberalism. His theory of justice was meant to be political, rather than a complete metaphysical theory of the person. Citizens may understand themselves through very different religions, philosophies, and communities. They can still endorse shared political principles for different reasons. The debate remains unresolved. Sandel is right that human beings do not live as detached rational calculators. Rawls is right that social belonging cannot be allowed to determine whose basic liberties count. A just society needs both political principles that treat citizens as equals and forms of community that give their lives meaning. Rawls's theory is strongest on the first task. It is less complete on the second. There are other limits as well. Rawls's model assumes citizens as participants in social cooperation, making it difficult to address severe disability, lifelong dependency, and unpaid care. Its focus on primary goods may overlook that different people require different resources for comparable freedom. The theory also assumes a bounded political society, leaving global supply chains, international finance, and climate burdens far harder to address. And because the original position abstracts from particular identities, it can struggle to show how historical injustice continues through apparently neutral institutions. These are real limitations, but they do not erase Rawls's achievement. The deepest contribution of a theory of justice is not a particular tax rate, welfare program, or mathematical formula. It is a change in the burden of proof. Inequality was often treated as the natural starting point, while the burden of proof fell on the disadvantaged. The poor had to explain why the distribution was unfair, while minorities argued why the majority's welfare should not prevail. Those excluded from opportunity were asked to prove that the competition had been rigged. Rawls reverses the question. Because no one chooses their social origin or natural endowment, inequality does not justify itself. An inequality that emerged from a market is not automatically fair. Hard work may justify a reward within a system. It cannot, by itself, justify the system that determines the reward. And a policy that increases total prosperity does not prove that the burdens placed on particular people are acceptable. An unequal institution must be justified to those who occupy its least favorable positions. It must explain why the inequality is necessary, why opportunities are genuinely fair, and why the arrangement improves the prospects of those who receive the smallest share of social advantage. That is a demanding standard. Rawls does not promise that everyone will agree about the good life. He does not eliminate competition, talent, ambition, or economic difference. He asks whether free and equal citizens could accept the terms under which those differences operate. Return to the cake. One cuts, the other chooses works, because the person dividing the cake does not know which piece they will receive. The veil of ignorance brings the same logic into political philosophy. Design the rules without knowing whether you will be powerful or vulnerable, admired or ignored, healthy or disabled, wealthy or poor. You may still choose a society with inequality, but you will no longer be able to assume that you deserve the advantages waiting for you. And you will have to ask a question that every unequal society would prefer to avoid. Could these rules be explained, without embarrassment, to the person who receives the worst hand? Rawls never gave us the final answer to justice. No philosopher could. What he gave us was a place from which the question becomes impossible to escape.